Welcome to today's show. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small, and I want to thank you for joining me on today's show. I'm sorry I've been away for the last couple of weeks running some errands and taking care of some business. So I'm afraid I haven't been available to do any shows lately. So I had 2 weeks off. Things are beginning to settle down a little bit, but I am afraid that I may have to take some time off later on this week, coming up in next week. But I'm going to try and get these shows out for you guys so that you don't miss the storylines that are out there. And I want to emphasize, what I try to do on this show is I'm not looking to do episodes about what you could watch on CNN or on MSNBC or even on Fox News. I want to catch those stories that nobody's looking at, that everyone else is missing. And stories like on what's happening in the economy, issues about, for instance, what I see happening with retail property, commercial property, I should say, and how I think that it could be a cause for a lot of concern, both internationally and nationally. And I want to talk about other stories, particularly with respect to race and with respect to civil rights, and of course, things that are interesting to progressives and liberals. But I'm also willing to criticize where I see it necessary. And talk about some of those stories that maybe liberals don't want to talk about that are really concerning and that we should look out for. However, I am going to sort of disobey my usual route, my usual storyline, and I'm going to talk about a story that has made a lot of rounds recently, a lot of play recently, and that is this guy, Donald Trump. Donald Trump found guilty last week of 34 counts, felony counts of crimes. And I want to talk about it today and I want to talk specifically about two of the things that have really bugged me, two talking points that have really bugged me. And some of them are surprising in my view. But it goes into something that I believe that has always been true, particularly of conservatives. And that is basically that there are the laws that they want to follow and then the laws that they have problems with, right? But they claim to be the rule of law party. And by rule of law party, you don't get to choose the rules of law that you want to choose. You have to follow the rules that have been set by the people's elected representatives, etc. But it appears to me to be that a lot of talking heads, particularly on the right, are all of a sudden decide that they want to change their view on whether they should follow the rule of law or not, which laws should be followed, which laws are considered political hack laws and which laws are not. And their God King, Donald Trump, and his criminal cohorts, right? We've got a lot of them. Everyone from Navarro to Steve Bannon, who's going to have to report to jail, I think on the 10th or 11th of June. He has a criminal conspirators. And what's important to remember about Trump, and I think that the Justice Department gets right about him, as well as other state prosecutors in Georgia, for instance, what they get right about Trump is that you have to approach him like he's a mob boss. And mob bosses are notoriously difficult to capture because they're fully insulated from the crimes, right? You have criminal activities going on, murders, you have extortion, you have bribery, you have all kind of stuff. And you can't catch them because the structure of the mob is to have underlings do the crimes, and the mob boss is protected from that because if you catch the underling, they swear an oath to remain silent, to remain loyal to the organization, omerta, as they call it, a loyalty oath, and that insulates the main guy. If you approach Donald Trump, as for instance James Comey has said, that he operates like a mob boss and uses all the coded language and coded conversation like a mob would, then you have to begin to do things like RICO. And that is what got Donald Trump 34 convictions. And it's what's going to hurt him in Georgia if that's ever able to make it to trial, because that is the direction that they've gone. And I think other states need to follow as well, because you will not be able to get Donald Trump as a regular defendant if you go about it any other way. But here, all of a sudden, the rule of law party, the party that is supposed to be the party of the police, party of the law and of justice, they are now screaming and yelling and complaining about how this is some kind of a political scam and that Donald Trump didn't commit any crimes. And there are two arguments that have gone out there recently. One is that Donald Trump's conviction is unfair, it's politically motivated, and no one is convicted on these crimes. And the second argument that is out there is that Michael Cohen is a problem witness because of his criminal background, and he was a co-conspirator. And I want to take on these two issues, and I want to talk about these two issues because I believe very firmly, and I think it's pretty much demonstrable, that Donald Trump is not going to be convicted on all of the other crimes. And they are more serious crimes out there. The documents case is a serious crime. His involvement in January 6th is a serious crime. So I'm not saying that those are not more serious crimes. But what I am saying is that you have a party that has gone about passing a bunch of laws that are frivolous laws, in my view, that are there specifically to catch innocent or to catch ordinary citizens making mistakes, doing the best that they can, and yet they want to lock them up. Voter suppression laws, which I'll talk about later. We also have all of these laws that are there to prevent abortions and to really criminalize and chill abortions all over the South, where doctors don't know. They're so scared to perform abortions and scared to go to jail. Some can be executed, death penalty for people, doctors who perform abortions. So the idea of frivolous charges and frivolous sort of crimes, that is their bread and butter, the Republican Party and the conservative movement. But now all of a sudden that their God King, Donald Trump, is being charged uniquely, I will admit, with RICO standards and using RICO type of prosecutions. All of a sudden that those laws are unfair. Meanwhile, the mob was taken down. Meanwhile, other groups are taken down. We know in Georgia they used RICO to bring down a lot of black teachers who I'm sure the Republican Party at that time did not give a rat's ass that these were hardworking teachers who were all caught up in this scheme to help these young people cheat in Georgia in order to pass grades so that they looked good, that the schools looked good. Fonnie Willis had no problems locking a bunch of black teachers or prosecuting a bunch of black teachers using the RICO standard. You didn't hear Republicans complaining about it then. But all of a sudden that their God King, Donald Trump, is being used, all of a sudden they've got a big problem with RICO. And specifically right now, they've got a problem with this man, Alvin Bragg. And I'm going to take on the first issue right now, and that is that Alvin Bragg has been accused of bias against Trump. That is the one thing that you're hearing a lot, and I'm going to play in a minute all of that dialogue, even from people who know better. But this argument breaks down in two ways, in my view. The first argument is that the tax crimes are minor. No one is ever charged with these kind of crimes. And from the Wall Street Journal editorial, they said, quote, charges are typically a misdemeanor. They can be elevated to conceal another crime, but the indictment does not mention another crime. That was done. That statement was made a year prior to the actual adjudication of this case, the actual trial. And then the Wall Street Journal editorial more recently, I think last week, on their podcast said that the charges are unprecedented. The nature of the offense turned into a felony is pretty rare, 7-year-old charges, and it's a victimless conduct. So that's one set of criticism for Alvin Bragg, is that no one is ever charged for this, and these are relatively minor crimes. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, and particularly I'm going to reflect to how this reflects onto the mob. And then the other charge, which some very smart people who, in very, in some senses, courageous and brave people have spoken out against it. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago regarding Fareed Zakaria, where I was really disappointed that he said on his show, quote, "I doubt the New York indictment would have been brought against a defendant whose name was not Donald Trump, as if to imply that this was politically motivated. Mitt Romney called the prosecution a political malpractice, and House Republicans said, quote, was never about what Trump did, about who he is, the leading Republican candidate for president." So they are nakedly claiming that Alvin Bragg is doing this all because Donald Trump is a president. He's an innocent man. He's the leading Republican. Alvin Bragg, they even said, campaigned on this. I think someone has fact-checked that and said that they're mistaking Alvin Bragg for Letitia James. But the bottom line is that they don't like these charges. They don't like these crimes. They're white-collar crimes, and people should not go to jail for that. Meanwhile, if you're black and you commit a minor crime, they should throw the book at you. But don't take my word for it. I actually have the clips. These are clips from the actual Wall Street Journal and the two Wall Street Journal articles that I mentioned. These are actual clips from them where they talk about their concern over these crimes and their indictment and the precedent. The precedent that they're setting by doing these kind of convictions. I'm going to play this, and I think it's only a few minutes. I'm going to play this and talk about it a little bit more. But this is from, again, this is the Wall Street Journal editorial page. This is their podcast. This first video, first audio, it's an audio only clip, is from a year before when the charges were initially announced. They're talking about what it really means and the problem that they have with it.
Let's take up the Trump indictment first. You folks talked about it yesterday a little bit, Kim, but the president indicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records. Now that we've had a chance to look at the indictment itself and the statement of facts that was sent out to accompany. Basically, these are the same crime committed 34 times, allegedly, and the indictment was really included no surprises. There were a lot of people who thought, with all the buildup and all the leaks, certainly Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, must have had some surprise, some new evidence. There was scarcely any in the indictment. And this crime he has charged Trump with is typically a misdemeanor in New York State. It can be elevated to a felony if it's done to conceal another crime. And here is where this really gets interesting, because the indictment mentions no such crime, other crimes.
And as for the sentencing itself, again, whether it's the prosecution's sentencing request or obviously the judge's decision itself, I mean, as you kind of hinted, I mean, as you said, first of all, this is unprecedented. I mean, even the nature of we can talk a little bit about this too when we get into the discussion of the case itself, but the nature of the offense, the bookkeeping misrepresentations kind of turned into a felony on the basis of interference in an election. I don't know if it's actually unprecedented, but it's pretty rare, right? So even though we might say conviction like this, a non-violent conviction, first-time offender, very, very rarely results in a custodial sentence. Again, because everything is so unprecedented, we can't be 100% certain of that, can we?
No, that's exactly right. I mean, look, if you look at Class E felonies, which is what these are, they even include some violent crimes. Now, the violent crime Class E felonies may get some jail time. The non-violent are treated as kind of glorified misdemeanors. And there's some core facts that cut very favorably for President Trump. Number one, this is 7 years old, victimless conduct. It is the height of technicality, even if you accept that there's legitimacy to these charges. And there's no sign that a 77-year-old man is about to go out on a crime spree based on his conviction for these bookkeeping entries. So, there's core things, no criminal record, age of the defendant, nature of the offense. All of those would typically put it into that category where a judge would impose probation, maybe some conditions of probation.
So I just want to be clear on something, and I'm not somebody who believes that Donald Trump should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Certainly not on these charges. I think that there are other charges that are much more serious. Like I said, I actually believe, and I think most people have said, that he's not going to do any jail time. He's going to be probably do some probation or something like that. The problem, of course, is that he has not shown any contrition. He said it's all a scam, it's all a fake. He's also threatened people, threatened the judge's daughter, and slammed the daughter, slammed the prosecutors and everything. So while, given everything that was said, and by the way, I think that lawyer was Trusty, his old lawyer, who on that last video clip, who left his team. But I think that a normal human being and a normal person would not even have been charged with these, because they would not have said that they never happened. A normal person would have shown contrition. A normal person wouldn't have gone out and tried to threaten the judge and the judge's daughter and said this was all a political hack job and it never happened, right? You have to deal with, in my view, in law and in law enforcement, if we're talking about being fair, you have to deal with the facts as they present themselves. And Donald Trump is not contrite. Donald Trump thinks that he is an innocent man and continues to lie about it. And unfortunately for him and for his team, there's nothing you can do to change the man. It is what it is. I don't believe that, however, that he should be thrown the book at. He should be treated any worse. I don't think he should be treated any better. I would argue that probably some of these laws are overreaching and are egregious in a country that claims to be about people getting a fair trial and not being overly burdensome, charging people, taking away their liberties over minor things. But unfortunately, if you are a Republican, if you're a conservative, you have never believed that, unless it's about the vaccine or about the culture wars. You have believed that people who commit even minor crimes should be thrown in jail. So that is a very interesting, nuanced view of these charges. They're minor. No one's ever been charged under this. This is all basically a paperwork error sort of charge. Donald Trump is being prosecuted on 7-year-old charges. These are minor things. Here is the other charge that's out there that they're saying, and this is the one that Mitt Romney and others have started talking about. And I'm going to read some of this because if you're listening to this, it is not audible. That it's not conversation, it's actually text. So I'm going to stay in here. I'm going to read it. It says, DA Alvin Bragg committed political malpractice by taking New York's Trump. This is Romney saying this. Romney accused Bragg of political malpractice by pursuing criminal charges against Trump. The Utah Republican and staunch Trump critic told his biographer, McKay Coppins, that Bragg may have won the battle, but now he has lost the war.
Biden, when the Justice Department brought out indictments, I would have immediately pardoned him. I'd have pardoned President Trump.
Secret that their case against President Trump has been a witch hunt from the beginning. From a conflicted judge who has donated to anti-Trump causes to the lead prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, who campaigned on going after President Trump, to the prosecution's star witness, who my colleague, our conference chair, referenced, Michael Cohen, a real criminal. This was never about what President Trump did or didn't do. It's about who he is. He's the leading Republican candidate for president. And the Democrats have made it clear that they will stop at nothing, even if it means weaponizing our justice system and trampling on the rule of law to try and prevent him from getting to the White House again.
Now, I think a lot of this is very strategic, right? I think that the Republican Party cannot bring itself to getting its hands dirty. And I think that what they're trying to do now is that they are trying to get in bed with, or they have gotten in bed with Donald Trump and criminals, because they can then allow criminality to happen and they can make the excuse that it is all a political hit job. So Donald Trump, Navarro, you've got Bannon, you've got all of these guys, the Kraken lady in New York, Chesborough, in Georgia, Chesborough, Jenna Ellis, all who have pled guilty to these crimes. They can now be seen their criminal activity can be seen as political. And it's actually an insidious kind of position to take, because it's very similar to the view that liberals and particularly civil rights leaders have taken over the Republican Party regarding voting, right? One of the things that we've said is that they're trying to pass laws to prevent voting because these are racist. They don't want blacks voting. But what they're saying is that we're doing this for politics. We're doing this to ensure that we remain politically in power, and it's not illegal, and it's not for racist purposes. But what the left would say, and what the civil rights leaders would say, if you prosecute people for their political leanings, and the political leanings of one group is the opposition is on the other side, in this case in red states, it is Democrats, and all the Democrats are black, you are in fact, by prosecuting all the Democrats, also prosecuting all the blacks in the area for racial purposes. So they have begun to use an argument that civil rights leaders have used for years to say that these prosecutions, because these are all criminals, and the criminals happen to all be Republicans, that by going after criminals, you're going after Republicans, and it's politically motivated. So it's a very insidious argument, and it's troublesome because the rule of law becomes very squishy, and it becomes very opaque, and it becomes very difficult for people to figure out what's right and what's wrong, what's up and what's down. And Donald Trump lives for that. That is what he's trying to do. And all despots, all dictators want to do that. They want to muddy the waters so that it becomes very difficult to understand the differences between these two things. When you're politically prosecuting a person because they're a criminal, and when you're politically prosecuting or politically passing laws because you are trying to use racist tactics to block people from, in this case, voting in these states that have used gerrymanders to cleave up and cut up the vote in a number of states like Alabama, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas, etc. I could go on and on and on, Mississippi, etc. But another fascinating things that I want to talk about has happened, because if you know anything about the reporting, one of the days, I think it wasn't the last day, it was the day or so before, the Biden administration wisely sent a team out to the courthouse because Donald Trump was giving speeches, and they wanted to have a counter narrative out there. And who did they bring out there but Robert De Niro. And this is this article, I think this is from the Hollywood Reporter. It says President Biden's campaign on Tuesday showed up outside former President Trump's New York City criminal hush money trial with actor Robert De Niro. It was a sharp about the face for the Trump team, which had largely ignored the trial since it began 6 weeks ago and is now looking to capitalize on its drama-filled closing argument, sending the Goodfellas actor and the first responders who were at the Capitol on January 6th. Quote, "We New Yorkers used to tolerate him when he was just another crappy real estate hustler masquerading as a big shot," De Niro said. "I love this city. I don't want to destroy it. Donald Trump wants to destroy not only the city but the country, and eventually he could destroy the world." Now, why do I say this was a very interesting actor to bring out there? Bob De Niro has been out there criticizing Trump for a long time. He's a very well known, and he has a presence about him that is very powerful. But also, he has been famously, and is very famously, played mobsters. And they mentioned Goodfellas, but I actually think that the more appropriate mobster that he played for this time is Al Capone. And this is him from the Untouchables. And what's important about this, and about Al Capone in particular, is that I think this goes into this narrative about these charges and how they're minor charges, and it goes into RICO. RICO is connected to the mob. The RICO statute was created to bring down the mob. And I think famously, I thought people knew this, and it was a pretty understood thing. But famously, Al Capone was one of the first and most prolific gangsters. And he was brought down by tax evasion. And I think everybody knew this. It was a paper case. This guy was killing people. He was extorting people. He was breaking people's legs. This is during the Prohibition era. He was doing all kind of crazy stuff. But they could never, because of the nature of the mob, they could never get him on all of those criminal acts. They could only get him on tax evasion. And, I think everybody knew that this taxes brought down the mob. In the movie Goodfellas, the plot of the movie, I'm going to just read here. This is, I think you can find on Wikipedia what the plot of the movie is. It says that discovering that Capone has not filed income tax return for 4 years, Wallace, this is the member of the, Wallace is the member of the Untouchables, who is an accountant. He's not a regular gunslinger. He's an accountant, and he discovers in the movie, as well as in real life, I'll get to that in a minute, but he discovers that Capone has never filed taxes for 4 years. And Wallace suggests trying to build a tax evasion case against him, as Capone's network keeps him well insulated from the other crimes. Capone is later convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in prison. This is that scene from Untouchables. And by the way, if you haven't seen Untouchables, I don't know what you're doing. It is one of the greatest movies, mob movies. And I'm not I'm very critical of glorifying the mob, Sopranos and the rest of them. But Untouchables, De Palma, De Niro at his best, Kevin Costner, Andy Garcia, they're brand new and they are fantastic. But here is the scene in which this aha moment comes about, and it's almost dismissed because of Elliot Ness, who is Kevin Costner in this. He almost, and the way he acts in this is just incredible. But I want to play this claim. This is a clip from The Untouchables. Check it out if you haven't seen the movie. I'm going to play it right now. I got to bring up the audio here. Okay.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Oscar Wallace.
Uh-huh.
I've been assigned here by the Washington Bureau.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I'm glad to have you here, Mr. Wallace. Excuse me. We are a little in the dark here, but any ideas you may have.
Well, actually, yes, sir, I do. And the one that I want to try first is this. He has not filed a return since 1926.
A return.
An income tax return.
Income tax.
Yes, sir.
What do you do at the Bureau, Mr. Wallace?
Oh, I'm an accountant.
An accountant?
Yes, sir, and the Bureau has sent me here.
Would you excuse me? Please.
Okay, let's go.
Where are we going?
These walls are yours.
Fantastic movie. Fantastic movie. If you haven't seen The Untouchables, you should see it. The acting, the directing, everything is brilliant. The look on Kevin Costner's face, Sean Connery, it's just brilliant. But the important thing here, the salient part here, is that, like I say, I thought everybody understood that it is taxes that brought down the mob. It was a paper case. It was not all the killings and all the shootings and all of the breaking of prohibition laws. It was a paper case. And it's the same thing with Donald Trump. unless you're willing to argue that the mob should have gone free and the FBI should never have taken down the mob using, and Al Capone specifically, because he broke the law, tax evasion law. He didn't file his taxes like he's supposed to, and claimed he had a legitimate business when he didn't. Unless you're willing to argue that, Republicans, you have no credibility on this issue. And just to put out the final point, this is the real Al Capone. And this is from his Wikipedia page. You can look this up on Wikipedia to find the full article. But it says, quote, Alphonse Gabriel Capone, sometimes known as the nickname Scarface, was an American gangster and businessman who attained notoriety in the Prohibition era as the co-founder and boss of the Chicago outfit from 1925 to 1931. His 7-year reign as a crime boss ended when he went to prison at the age of 33. Federal authorities became intent on jailing Capone and charged him with 22 counts of tax evasion. He was convicted of 5 counts in 1931. He was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. After conviction, he replaced his defense team with experts in tax law, and his grounds for appeal were strengthened by a Supreme Court ruling, but his appeal ultimately failed. So there it is. For all of those folks who are out there who believe that Donald Trump, and this is a paper case, and these are minor charges, and this is not a big deal, and this is all, never something that's never charged, yada, yada, yada. Look at the mob. Donald Trump is a mobster, and they're charging him like a mobster. And paper cases are what brings down mobsters. And unless you're trying to argue that the mob should still have operated and should still be running around with impunity, going all the way back to Al Capone, but as recent as John Gotti, then, if that's your position, then you're no longer the rule of law party, and you no longer really care about making sure that the laws, white-collar crime, is taken as seriously as everything else. Because believe me, I know when I file my taxes, I want to make sure I got everything right, because I'm afraid to be hit not only by a fine, but I know that I could go to jail if I write fraudulent information down on my taxes, like Donald Trump did 34 times. But more importantly, the pushback has been minimal amongst Democrats, unfortunately, but there's one person that's been out there really talking about this. And George Conway is that guy. And I'm not a big fan of George Conway. I think he is a conservative through and through, a proud conservative, I think, of his record. And I think that, he's a guy who went after Clinton and really is a by-the-book, rule of law kind of guy. And the best thing about him, however, is he has standards that he's not willing to sacrifice. And the best thing about him really is that as a surrogate for Joe Biden, which I don't know that he's doing it intentionally, but that he really feels principled about this, he has been the best voice out there pushing back against this. I mean, and the guy is not, unlike Democrats, he's not willy-nilly kind of, going back and forth wishy-washy about this. He is firm. He knows the law. He's a lawyer. He's a conservative in good standing. And he knows what the hell he's talking about. And this is a scene from George Conway explains it all to Sarah Longwell. And I want to play this clip, 2 clips here, and talk about it because I think it's so powerful.
So what do you make of the Republican response to this?
I am running out of words to express disgrace and contempt and vileness and mendacity to describe these people.
You've still got a few words.
Those are lots of words. They're just no good words to describe it. I mean, these people, first of all, they're enormous hypocrites, because if a Democrat had ever done 1/50th of what Trump has done, or zero, as we can show by, their continual ranting and raving about the Biden crime family, they would be up in arms, and they would be praising these prosecutions. And then, they're just lying. They're just lying about they're lying about the facts. They're lying about the law. They're ignoring, the fact that there was a fair jury trial. You can't even get them to talk about what happened. I mean, if you ask Speaker Johnson. I think they tried to ask him, well, you know, what this bit about the porn star and the hush money, you want to tell us what you think of that? And he's, no. You know, they can't. They just refuse to engage on the merits, and they just, you know, they lie about everything, and they lie about they contend that the charges weren't grounded in law. They contend that the jury didn't know what it was supposed to be convicting on, and it was just, it's like, no, this was a pretty simple, clear case at the end of the day, and the only reason why it was why it's unique and kind of unusual is because of its unusual facts and involves an unusual defendant. But the legal theory that the legal basis which is that you can't falsify records in New York and that it's a felony when you do it to cover up another crime is, you know, it's been applied in any number of contexts. You just, you know, this is just an unusual context in the sense that how many presidential candidates are dumb enough to pay off a porn star to hush her up, and they don't stay hushed, and then engage in all of this incredible fraudulent documentation to cover it up. So
one of the things that has been kind of the central argument is everybody, like on Twitter or what, they'll be like, what's the fundamental crime? What's the underlying crime? And so answer that.
Well, the underlying crime is you cannot falsify business records in the state of New York.
That's a felony?
It's at a minimum, it's a misdemeanor if it's falsification of documents in the second degree, and if it's in the first degree, that's a felony, a Class C felony. And what makes, you know, the dividing line between second degree falsification of documents and first degree falsification of documents is whether you were doing, what is your intent, whether you were doing it with the intent to cover up some other crime.
And the crime is the FEC
and not actually
violation?
some other illegality or some other crime to solicit votes through unlawful means in the state of New York. And the unlawful means here was, you know, there was a federal election campaign violation, there were tax violations, there was, you know, this was designed to cover up election fraud. And that's a pretty simple theory, and that's what was charged to the jury, and that's what they found. And there was no question about it, because you had this guy who was basically, he wanted to pay off Stormy Daniels $130,000. He managed to do it through using a cutout, which is illegal under the Federal Election Campaign Act. And then they committed a tax violation to cover that up, to make it look like it was something other than what it was, which was a reimbursement for a payoff. They pretended it was income to him, so they committed tax fraud by engaging, you know, by grossing up the amount. It was, you know, the kind of aggravated falsification of books and records that was exactly meant to fall within the purview of the first degree falsification of business prohibition.
I saw you.
Falsification of business records prohibition.
I saw you on CNN get like into it with Scott Jennings.
Scott Jennings, I think this is for you. Where is that party?
Well, I disagree with a number of things George said, of course. I mean, he's talking about these obvious crimes that were committed. I mean, he's talking about the obvious crimes that were supposedly committed, but that's the core of what a lot of decidedly non-MAGA Republicans are mad about, is that there is no underlying crime. I looked at the statement from Maine Senator Susan Collins, who I think encapsulated it perfectly. She said this was a partisan prosecutor who promised to get Trump. Nonsense. And that's what he did. Not promise to go after the law, but he promised to go after Donald Trump. And so the issue is here, what is the crime? He's never been indicted for or convicted of the campaign finance theory at the core of this case. And so Republicans are wondering today, you know, what do you have to do to build a defense against something you've never been convicted of in the first place?
What do you got to say to Scott?
I have to say, I mean, look, you know, Scott's lying, and that's the problem with the Republican Party. It is continually addicted to lies.
Wait a minute. What am I lying about?
You're lying, Scott. You're lying about the law. You're lying about what the jury was charged to find. They don't have to find an underlying crime. They had to find the intent to cover up an underlying crime. And the underlying crime was pretty obvious.
What was the crime?
You ran for public office, Scott. You ran for public office, Scott. You know you can't take money from somebody and reimburse them as a, you know, if it's a campaign
I've never
expense.
run.
You
I've
know
never
that
run for
damn
public
well.
office.
And okay, fine. Well, you're close enough. You're involved in politics to know that. Okay, so that's the problem with the Republican Party, is that they are suffused with lies. I don't know why this network is paying Scott to say those lies.
Whoa,
on his
okay,
morning
let's
show.
not
But
go
this is
there, George,
ridiculous.
please, let's not go there.
No,
Okay.
we should go there.
Scott is our colleague, and we're going to treat him respectfully as such. Continue.
What was his point? Was what?
I have to go back and remember, but it was just, he basically was, the jury wasn't even charged, wasn't even told what the underlying crime, I forget exactly what it was, but it was just outright false. It was just outright false, and it was just talking points straight from Mar-a-Lago. And they all repeat this stuff, and he's not a lawyer. He had no idea what he was talking about, and it was just, you know, they just spout out the lie of the day, and that they all they all think they can just say the same things and just repeat it, and then it becomes fact. I just got tired of that, and I got tired of the fact that, you know, CNN is like paying for this. I mean, I get that there are, you know, if I'm running a network, I'm running a television show, I'm running a newspaper, I want to have opposing views. But when one side is continually just saying things that are untrue, unsupported in law, unsupported in fact, you know, saying that the trial was rigged, saying this, you're just basically casting aspersions on the rule of law. You have to call that out.
Yeah.
I have never seen a Democrat do that. I have never seen such a powerful pushback. I have never seen, at least recently, any of Biden's surrogates do that. I've never seen, particularly with respect to this, but just in general, the ability to go out there and truly call out lies and take on the right, not just Trump, but the right in total, and call them liars and speak on these things in that nature is unique. And they could learn a lot from George Conway, and bravo, I applaud it, I love it, good for him. Let me just briefly take on the other issue that the Republicans say, and this is, there's an issue with Michael Cohen. That, by the way, is not Michael Cohen. That's John Gotti in the picture. I'm going to get over to him next as to why I'm having it there. But it should be obvious by now. John Gotti is probably one of the most famous mobsters of the current era, certainly of my generation. But the big problem with Michael Cohen is there seems to be this new issue, this issue with RICO standard. As I talked about at the top of the show, we're all of a sudden questioning these methods. These are tried and true methods, going all the way back to Capone, going to John Gotti. These are ways that you bring down the mob because of the structure of the mob, because it insulates the head of the mob is so insulated, and it's about flipping co-conspirators. Because of the nature of the mob, you have to get people from within the mob to turn around and flip and decide to turn state's evidence. And this is, everybody knows that this happens. It happened in the movie The Goodfellas, but it happens all the time, and it happened with Gotti, which I'm going to bring into in a minute. But the other thing is, you know, Dr. Phil, who I used to think was and he's a very smart man. I used to think he really was somebody who could be listened to as far as being able to get common sense out there. But he went on with Abby Phillip recently and talked about black letter law and talked about co-conspirators should be barred from testimony for testifying against one another when one has already pled guilty. That testimony could prejudice the jury. And he goes on to talk about this with Phillips, and I think this has gotten a lot of play recently, but I'm going to play a clip from this. It's a longer clip. It's not as long as Judge Conway's. I really wanted to play that because of how powerful that moment was. But this is a clip from that interview. And here Phil basically tries to talk about this issue as if it's unheard of. It's unprecedented to have people who are co-conspirators, who are part of the crime, to turn around and to be flipped to speak to the jury about the crime and about the criminal, the defendant who's on trial. Like, this is unprecedented abuse or of some nature. But let me play this clip.
I think there are some things that are considered black letter law or hornbook law that's just really not something that is controversial at all, that was violated. I think you don't have someone that is considered to be an accomplice in a crime that has pled out or made a non-prosecution agreement and allow that information into the jury's awareness, because it's very prejudicial and is not really probative of anything that they're asked to be problem solving or consider.
Who are you referring to there?
Michael Cohen.
I mean, well,
yeah.
Dr. Field, I don't want to get too deep into the law here, but it is not uncommon at all for people who are accomplices to crimes, people who have taken plea deals, non-prosecute. That is not uncommon at all for those people to then testify in subsequent trials for their alleged co-conspirators. That's kind of how a lot of these prosecutions work.
Well, really, give me examples of where that has been considered appropriate.
I mean, look, prosecutors are prosecuting organized crime all the time, and in a lot of those cases, they are relying on co-conspirators to put people who are at the higher levels of the organization behind bars. I don't understand how you can say that because someone signed.
All right, I'm going to pause this here because I don't want to go into it anymore. I don't know what Dr. Phil is doing here. I'm very confused. This guy is not a lawyer, but he has worked with lawyers. He's a jury consultant. I think maybe he is probably a guy who has spent most of his time, and I think maybe his position is one that is a defense attorney's position, and is how defense attorneys see an abuse of the law over the years through this kind of cooperation or whatever. You know, again, I'm somebody who would probably be more on that side, saying that I think that particularly since black and brown people, particularly black people in this country, has been abused by an abusive, corrupt, in some senses, law enforcement or justice department. And we know those abuses have existed historically. Maybe he's taking that position because in general he thinks in theory, or there is a school of thought that believes that all of these things shouldn't be allowed because of their immoral, let's say, viewpoint. It doesn't sound like he's saying a lot of that there. It sounds like he's saying this is almost totally uncommon. But, you know, John Gotti, this man, John Gotti, famously was prosecuted by the feds. It was a RICO case. Same case was used to take on the mob. And I wish I had been there, because I would have told Abby Phillips to mention a man by the name of Sammy the Bull Gravano.
Salvatore the Bull Gravano, one of the most notorious gangsters in mafia history.
Well, I mean, you could tell by the body language that they were very close. John Gotti trusted him implicitly.
And I realized that John probably eventually would take me out for no other reason but he wants one show, one boss of John Gotti. He don't want anybody to be his equal. He don't want anybody in any way, shape, or form to shine. And I guess I was shining too much.
So Sammy the Bull betrays everything he once pledged a blood oath to, going from one of the most powerful figures in the New York City Mafia to its most infamous informant.
They have said you are the single most important witness ever to testify against the mob.
I think I am. An underboss is the highest position who's ever cooperated, but I think I'm in a position of being the most knowledgeable underboss who's cooperated.
Gravano revealing key details of racketeering and murder helped put Gotti away for life.
He flipped and took down John Gotti. He's actually still alive, which I was surprised, and has a new series out. He has I think a book and a series out by ABC. It's on Hulu. I think, I can't remember what it's called, but you can do a search, Sammy the Bull Gravano, and take a look and look at the Hulu series. This is a guy who was a captain. He was a captain. He was a big-time killer for the mob, for John Gotti. He was an enforcer or a fixer, as you might call it. And he did a lot of killings for John Gotti. And when he got wind of the fact that John Gotti was out to do him in, because he had become so popular and had become the second to John Gotti, when he got wind of the Gotti talking about offing him, he decided to turn state's evidence. He admitted to certain crimes and then became the star witness that brought down John Gotti. And John Gotti went to jail and I think later on died of cancer. But also, one of the very interesting things that I think came out in the trial was this. The prosecution made this statement, which I thought was very interesting, very brilliant on their case. And they talked about Michael Cohen as a witness. And this is from the prosecutor, Steinglass. And it says that the prosecutor, Steinglass, noted that it's not Cohen who's on trial, but Trump, the man whom Cohen worked for a decade. We didn't choose Michael Cohen. We didn't pick him up at the witness store. Mr. Trump chose Mr. Cohen for the same qualities his attorneys now urge you to reject, he told the jury. And the problem also with Dr. Phil's argument is, number one, that the Trump team did not argue this. They could have gone to the judge and made the same thing about black letter law or Hornbook law, in that there is something unfair about prejudicing the jury when you've got a co-conspirator. They could have argued that to the judge. But instead, they argued, number two, they argued instead that Cohen should be blocked because he previously committed perjury. So it wasn't that they were saying that he shouldn't be in there because he's a co-conspirator, that his testimony should be blocked because he's a co-conspirator. They're saying that he had previously committed perjury. And the judge said Cohen had not been charged with perjury for his more recent testimony, so that he wouldn't block his testimony for that. Number four, Cohen was not the star. That's the other thing to remember, that this was a paper case. He only corroborates the documents and the statements made by other witnesses. Pecker is more the star, and the documents are the star. You have Pecker, who is still a supporter of Donald Trump. You have Hope Hicks, who was more of a star, more important than Donald Trump. And the other problem is that Cohen isn't the only one caught up in the crime that pled and testified. David Pecker is a far more damning witness. As I mentioned earlier, David Pecker was the first person on the stand. He is the guy who is the first to come out and say that, catch and kill and all of these things that Donald Trump was fully aware of, that they had gone into a cooperation agreement to catch these stories, kill them, and then to go about and prevent people from knowing about the fact that he had committed these sexual acts after this tape had come out with him talking about grabbing women by the genitalia. The campaign was terrified that there were more stories like this out there. And after that happens, then this story about Stormy Daniels is David Pecker gets wind of this, hears about this, and the campaign is terrified that a double whammy of the Access Hollywood grab him by the vagina story had already gone out there and called an earthquake. People were banding and jumping ship. Republicans were jumping ship left and right over that story. Then they heard that McDougal had talked about coming out and talking about her involvement with Donald Trump, and then that Stormy Daniels was going to write her book. That terrified the campaign. Hope Hicks testified about that. That was very damning testimony on her part. She, although she wasn't one of the people involved in the story, that gave context to everything, and you needed a Michael Cohen to act as the glue to connect all of these. But at the end of the day, like George Conway says, he talks about tax forms or tax papers. They're tax documents, and they are basically, he lied on these tax forms that he paid Michael Cohen for legal services. They were not legal services. In fact, what they were was this money to stop Stormy Daniels from talking, and that fake document that was saying that they were paying Cohen for legal services, when in fact it was a reimbursement for telling Daniels to be quiet, and that the purpose, the reason, the jury had to find that the reason that they were trying to get her to be quiet was because if her story had gotten out, the public would have heard about this, and it could have prejudiced them. It could have made them decide that Donald Trump was unfit for office, and that is a crime as well. They did not have to find, as Conway says, they did not have to find that an actual crime was created. They had to find that Donald Trump and his team, and in particular Donald Trump, because he's the man on trial, that Donald Trump thought that he would lose the election if the public had found out he had sex with a porn star while he was married. He would have lost the evangelical vote, and if he had lost the evangelical vote, he would not have become president, and that he needed her to remain quiet, and he needed Cohen, he needed someone else to pay them, because they didn't want to get out that Donald Trump had paid her. So they needed it to be quiet before the election, and the prosecution proved that point. I think that anyone who has been following the case, anyone like George Conway who knows the law, could easily say that this was a layup. This was not even a close call. He broke the law 34 times, found guilty, and he's now a convicted felon. And as much as the Republican Party would like to scream and yell about this, how this is, and not just the Republican Party, but the likes of Dr. Phil and Fareed Zakaria would like to call this, and Mitt Romney, that this is politically motivated and all this other crap. That's crap. That's BS. Donald Trump was found guilty by a jury. It was the right call. It was a good call. And it was a fair call. And that is the purpose of this video. I don't know if you guys may have missed that. I thought it was very important for me personally, as I was thinking about this, to get the story out in case anyone watching this channel may have missed what the thread is here, what is really going in, why did he be found guilty, what are these Republicans talking about, this is never charged, etc., etc. The federal government for decades have been bringing down the mob this way, through tax evasions, Al Capone, Gotti, through flipping people like Sammy DeBovo Gravano. This is how the process works to bringing down people like a Donald Trump or like a mob boss. Now, you can quibble about whether this is fair, that this is right, that this is good, but it's too late. Change the law if you don't like it. Republicans should change the law and get rid of the RICO standard, or the RICO statute, if they don't like it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me. Please like and subscribe if this was at all useful. You can also find me at Mastodon. You can find the show at Mastodon, mastodon.vt.me/@whatyoumissed. Thank you for watching me. Thank you for joining me, and you'll see me on the next video. Thank you so much. Hey there, fantastic viewers. Eric Darnley Small here, and I hope you're loving today's episode of What You Missed. You've reached the end of today's show, but don't worry, there's more show coming up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the bell so that you'll be notified when more content is available. You can also help the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm find new viewers so that I can keep bringing you all this incredible content you enjoy. But wait, there are more ways to support the show. You can make a contribution through the show's PayPal, which goes a long way in helping produce even better content for you. And consider becoming a part of our growing community by joining our Mastodon site at mastodon.vt.me/@whatyoumissed for more engaging discussions and exclusive updates. And here's something you won't want to miss. Mark your calendars for our live show streaming on YouTube and stream.vtip.me Monday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your support means the world to me, and together we're making What You Missed the best it can be. Thanks for being a part of my journey.